Dream with me here. What if Syrian President Bashar al-Assad wasn't the one who used chemical weapons on the Syrian people 2 weeks ago? That's the question Hawaiian Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard is asking. Gabbard has a pretty good reason to want more information. As a veteran who served in Iraq, she's no stranger to war-making on trumped-up pretenses, and she's no fan of it either. As she told Wolf Blitzer in an interview with CNN, quote, "What I believe and what you believe or others believe is irrelevant. What matters here is the evidence and the facts. Congress and the American people need to see and analyze this evidence and then make a decision based on that. Why should we just blindly follow this escalation of a counterproductive regime change war?" The thrust of Gabbard's argument here and elsewhere is that Trump should not have acted unilaterally in Syria without having presented Congress and the public with proof that it was really Assad who carried out these attacks, which frankly, Tulsi, is just incredibly reasonable. Unless, apparently, your former Vermont Governor, Howard Dean. Dean skewered Gabbard for her skepticism. Specifically, he tweeted, quote, "This is a disgrace. Gabbard should not be in Congress." Later, in an interview with MSNBC's Alex Witt, Dean continued, "Let's talk about facts," he said. "And the fact is, Assad is a butcher, a murderer, and he has repeatedly, over the past few years, used chemical weapons on his own people. What more do you want?" Okay, Howard, well, given our country's mixed history with getting things right about foreign leaders, even foreign leaders who are butchers and murderers, here's looking at you, Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction, Gabbard wanted the UN to conduct an independent investigation of the attack, to present the international community with its findings, and therefore offer proof that it was definitely Assad who launched it, because there are some pretty serious consequences if he wasn't. More importantly, there are actually some interesting arguments that may have led Gabbard to her skepticism, aside, of course, from the fact that she is clearly a soulless, spineless dictator lover and an Assad apologist, as Twitter has been so quick to notice. Think about this. 1 week before this chemical attack, Trump and his surrogates had stated specifically that they would not be seeking regime change in Syria. In other words, Assad, we're not going to try and take you out. On top of that, Assad and his forces are dominating the Syrian civil war. Barring extreme external involvement, Assad is going to win. So why would he take the risk and goad the international community, especially the United States, by using WMDs, the one thing that notoriously has the power to change international leaders' calculi from, say, "We're not seeking regime change," to "let's bomb their airbase"? When it comes to who, on the surface and from a purely strategic military standpoint, had the motive to carry out a chemical weapons attack, it would seem to be the rebels, the ones losing the war, the ones who desperately need to get international militaries re-involved if they want a chance at winning. Of course, this raises the question, can and would the rebels do this? And this is where things get interesting in a global conspiracy kind of a way. But hear me out. We start in 2013. Obama had drawn a red line on the issue of chemical weapons use in Syria. Then, when chemical weapons were used, he seemed to back down. He was excoriated as weak and indecisive, but was he? Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh says no, or sort of says no. He implies no. Months after the attack, Hersh wrote The Red Line and the Rat Line, an article published in the London Review of Books in which Hersh says Obama had chosen not to bomb Syria, despite his red line, because Obama had reason to believe that it might not have been Assad who had perpetrated the attacks after all. Quote, "Obama's change of mind had its origins at Porton Down, the defense laboratory in Wiltshire. British intelligence had obtained a sample of the sarin used in the August 21st attack, and analysis demonstrated that the gas used didn't match the batches known to exist in the Syrian army's chemical weapons arsenal. The message that the case against Syria wouldn't hold up was quickly relayed to the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff. The British report heightened doubts inside the Pentagon," end quote. Hersh goes on to talk about a path from Syria to Turkey that was being used to smuggle weapons to rebels. Everyone had their hand in it: Saudi Arabia, Qatar, likely the US, and most of all, Turkey. Now, this makes some sense, as all of those governments are openly supporting Syrian opposition groups. But Hersh goes on to say that this path was also being used to carry sarin gas to terrorist groups like the al-Nusra Front, an al-Qaeda affiliate group who has been working with rebel armies in Syria. According to Hersh, who, to his discredit, uses all anonymous sources identified only as things like former senior intelligence officer, according to Hersh and his sources, sarin gas was smuggled from Turkey into Syria and then used by al-Nusra to frame Assad in order to make Obama follow through on the red line. Put another way, there were people within the Turkish government who, quote, believed they could get Assad's nuts in a vice by dabbling with a sarin attack inside Syria and forcing Obama to make good on his red line threat. Now, I obviously have no idea if this is true. Hersh is a largely well-respected journalist with an impressive journalistic record. He has also, however, dabbled in a couple different conspiracy theories later in his career that may discredit him to some people. Nevertheless, having read his reporting on this, I have found it, at the very least, compelling. And a couple things back that up. First, when the chemical attacks were launched in 2013, like today, Assad was winning the war pretty handily. So once again, there's some conceptual dissonance. I get back to, is it really worth it? Assad knew about Obama's red line. Is the cost of getting the Americans involved really worth using WMDs on 1,000 non-militant civilians in a war you're winning? Assad is a sociopath, but he's not totally politically uncalculated. But you know what? I'm still trying to figure out the thinking of like half the men I've dated, none of which, to my knowledge, have run a country into the ground or ordered the slaughter of thousands of civilians. So far be it from me to start trying to enter the warped mind of a savage dictator. But there's also this. Eren Erdem, and I'm definitely not pronouncing that right, so I'm sorry, a member of the Turkish parliament, testified before parliament in 2013 to say that he had proof that Turkish officials had helped to smuggle sarin across the Turkish border into Syria. During his testimony, he waved a bunch of papers around, the proof, apparently, and has insisted this was the gas used in the 2013 attack. Now, there are reasons to be skeptical of Erdem. He may have been trying to make Turkish President Erdogan look bad, as Erdem and Erdogan come from opposing political parties. But Erdem's claims do corroborate several elements of Hersh's story, which is particularly interesting because Hersh never mentions Erdem, even though Hersh's article came out months after Erdem's testimony took place. First, Erdem's story would confirm the existence of the smuggling route from Turkey to Syria. Second, it would explain why the sarin used in the attack wasn't a chemical match to the sarin believed to be held by the Syrian government. On the other hand, and with all this said, the Obama administration has always remained steadfast that it was Assad who carried out these attacks. Hersh and other notable journalists like Robert Perry, who broke the Iran-Contra scandal in both AP and Newsweek, believe, however, that the Obama administration was simply saving face, or had some other ulterior motive that forced them to maintain their public stance vis-a-vis Assad's guilt. Obama's swift red line reversal, his sudden decision to wait and get congressional approval, despite having positioned missiles at the ready to attack Syria, makes this line of thinking seem reasonable to me. It would also undermine Howard Dean's masterful argument that we know Assad did this now because, well, Assad did it before. But okay. We fast forward from 2013 to the year 2017. Oh, how things have changed. Justin Bieber has an additional 51 tattoos. Kylie is gaining ground on Kim for Kardashian with the most Twitter followers. Taylor Swift has managed to become even more famous. Of course, Syrians are still being subjected to horrendous chemical attacks. The international community is still blaming Assad, and Assad is still saying it wasn't him. So unfortunately, the important things haven't changed. After the 2017 attacks, reporter Michael Gordon broke the story for the New York Times. Sort of. Gordon, it seems, has a mixed relationship with the truth. A startling reality, given that he works for perhaps the best-known paper in the world. Gordon was behind the aluminum tube story of 2002, which had supposedly provided the slam-dunk evidence that Saddam Hussein was building nuclear weapons. Turns out he was wrong, though. And his co-author on the story, Judith Miller, was even fired for her poor reporting on Iraq. Gordon wasn't fired, however, and in 2013, he wrote a New York Times article in which he claimed that by using, quote, vector analysis, the United States could prove that the sarin gas missiles used in Syria must have come from Assad. Again, he was wrong. Maybe not about Assad perpetrating the 2013 attacks, but about the utility of his vector analysis. Several rocket scientists demonstrated the fallacy of this analysis, and ultimately, Gordon was forced to print a small retraction. Still not having learned his lesson, apparently, Gordon co-authored a New York Times story in 2014 claiming that Russian troops had entered Ukraine based on 2 photographs that turned out to be staged. Once again, Gordon and the New York Times had to walk that back. What's most notable in all 3 of these cases is that Gordon's reporting was used, and in fact used prominently by the government, to publicly bolster the government's own narrative, which raises questions for me about the independence of Gordon's journalism. So you can imagine why there might be some skepticism when he now writes that, quote, only the Syrian military had the ability and the motive to carry out an aerial attack like the one that struck the rebel-held town of Khan Shaykhun. Only ones with a motive? What is he talking about? We've already mentioned that, at least on the surface, the rebels seem to be the ones with the motive to do this. If the United States and other countries don't get more involved, the rebels are done for. Why not try chemical weapons as a last-ditch effort? Not only that, but Theodore Postal, an MIT professor and national security advisor, who received his PhD in nuclear engineering from MIT, reviewed a document put out by the Trump administration that was supposedly the proof that Assad did this. Of course, they had put it out after Trump had already bombed the country, but potato, potato, right, Howard Dean? In any case, one thing Postal concludes is that some of the Trump team's evidence actually suggests that this attack was, quote, executed by individuals on the ground, not from an aircraft. So I guess that aerial attack that only the Syrian government is capable of carrying out may not have been an aerial attack at all. Postal had even more criticism for the Trump administration's paper of supposed proof, however, saying that he believes, quote, without a doubt, that the document does not provide any evidence whatsoever that the United States government has concrete knowledge that the government of Syria was the source of the chemical attack. Again, one guy's opinion, albeit a very educated guy's opinion, does not mean Trump and his administration are wrong or lying, but it does add to the pile of respectable names who are skeptical. So yeah, after all this, maybe Assad really did do it. I don't know. But here's the problem. Neither does Howard Dean. I get it's a scary time, Howard. I get that Trump is like a wild card who very well may turn out to be the Queen of Spades. But now is not the time for the rest of us to stoop to his level and become dogmatically dismissive of any idea we don't like. Suggesting that Gabbard shouldn't be in Congress because she has some doubts about the official narrative is, in this case, absurd and irresponsible. I said last week that I still wasn't sure where I stood on Trump's decision to bomb Syria. But now I'm sure on one thing. Trump should not have decided it alone. Tulsi Gabbard is right. Congress and the American public should have been afforded the opportunity to evaluate the evidence for themselves before we launched bombs that could embroil more American lives in a fight abroad. But Trump's action is potentially even more damaging than that. The point of these airstrikes is to send a message to the international community that the use of chemical weapons is unacceptable and will not be tolerated by the United States. In short, to disincentivize their future use. If Assad didn't do this, if there's even an outside chance rebel groups or other outsiders did this to get the United States involved, we've not only failed to disincentivize future use of chemical weapons, we've incentivized it by proving we can be manipulated and baited through their deployment. And that is a reason to kick someone out of political office.